presentation, and in order for you to qualify for the CLE in Kansas and Tennessee. Also, there will be handouts, so check your reminders, emails, and you can download it at the bottom right that says, handouts. Just a little bit about myself. I have been with TMHCC for about 17 years now, underwriting cyber liability coverage, employment practices liability, med defense, which is a billing coverage, for about 17 years. And prior to that, I was actually underwriting health insurance coverage. And so I have over 20 years of experience in underwriting insurance coverages. If you think that's indicative of how old I am, I'd say I started at age 10. Now, as some of you may know, in April of this year, Tokio Marine HCC was purchased NAS Insurance Services to create the cyber and professional lines at the TMHCC's family. NAS has been traded with TMHCC for over 20 years and have a long-standing trust that have developed over the past 20 years. We share the same values of specialty, innovation, service, and profitability. So NAS will continue to operate the same as it always has, but now with the financial strength and stability of TMHCC, who is rated superior by AM Best and very strong by Standard & Poor's and Fitch's ratings. We are based in Encino, which is about 30 minutes north of Los Angeles Airport. And if you've ever been here, it's about 30 minutes drive from LAX, but that's only if there's no traffic. Otherwise, it's about an hour and a half to get to our office. We have other offices in Chicago, Atlanta, and Northern California and New York. Let's go with the next slide. We do have a few things that we need to cover today. The first, I'll start with the cyber landscape as far as what's going on with the regulatory requirements in regards to cyber, as well as the cyber trends that we're seeing. We'll go through the cyber coverages that's available through the BAR plan and what a cyber claim is. We are going to go through a lot of cyber claims, and that should help you figure out how the policy could be triggered. And then lastly, because of the fact that we're seeing a lot of cyber claims, it's important to really take a look at how to prevent and mitigate losses in regards to cyber breaches. We have partnered with the BAR plan to provide you these, the cyber insurance benefits. So let's start with the cyber landscape, the data breaches by industry. In 2018, the ITRC, or Identity Theft Resource Center, documented over 1,200 data breaches, and which totaled about 446 million of records that were stolen. Now, this is an overwhelming increase of about 126% from the prior year, and rightly so, because we have seen the news on a daily basis that there's a lot of cyber crimes. Now, if you look at this pie chart, you'll see that the banking or financial industry and the government or military has a fairly low percentage of data breaches at 11% or 8%. It doesn't mean that they are not being targeted. In fact, they are aggressively being targeted. And the only reason why their percentages are so low is because they have a very sophisticated IT departments, and they're highly regulated to make sure that our private information and financial information is secured. If you look on the top left, medical and healthcare accounts for about 29% of the total data breaches. As you know, they collect and store a lot of our private information, so obviously they're going to be a target. But if you look at the dark blue section, which is businesses, there's a huge percentage of data breaches that were caused by, that was derived from businesses. It's about 46%. Now, this businesses accounts for retail stores, restaurants, as well as service industries such as law firms. Law firms, of course, have been affected to the private information that you also collect and store, which is valuable to criminals, so it puts you under high risk as well. So before I move on, I want to ask a question, a poll question. Let me go ahead and launch it here. So the question is, have you or your company ever experienced a data breach? So I'll give you a few minutes to answer the question. It looks like about 77% of you have already voted. And actually the results is pretty surprising, to tell you the truth. And don't worry, I'm not collecting the names of the companies that have cyber breaches in order to consider for underwriting purposes. Okay, so it looks like about 85% of you answered no, and 15% of you answered yes, which again is very surprising. So because of the fact that, like I said, there were about 446 records that were breached as of 2018. So this is really good to hear that you haven't been affected, because it can be very costly, as you'll see in further slides. So moving on to the next slide. Close that. Sorry, I keep losing my presentation here. Now, you know, almost daily you hear about large companies like Target, as well as government offices or large hotels that's being breached. But it's not just the big corporations that are targets for cyber crimes. In fact, small companies are definitely being targeted. Unlike large companies with sophisticated IT teams or departments, sophisticated criminals can also target small companies because of, they're vulnerable due to the lack of protocols. In fact, 67% of small businesses have been victim of cyber attack in the last 12 months. Another disturbing statistic is that about 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of a cyber attack, because of the high cost associated with the cyber crimes, and you'll see that in a few slides. About 60% of the reported cyber attacks were of malicious intent or negligent employees. In fact, companies spent over $1.4 million because of damages of theft or IT assets. In addition, about 1.5 million was due to business interruption. So we're seeing this more and more, where companies are crippled and can't service their clients because they can't access their computer systems and clients' data. In fact, we were just in Nashville last week doing a presentation of about 100 people in the room, and right after the presentation, a panicked agent came to us and said, my client just called me before the presentation, and he basically said that his store was robbed. They took all his computers, and we said, he said, is this something that we can report to your company? And we said, yes, absolutely. If they have the cyber policy, absolutely report it to us, and we can help them, assist them, and getting the data information, and then also notifying all the affected people. And so he went on to say, because we basically said we'll hire an IT forensics to help gather all the data that was lost or stolen. And he went on to say that, unfortunately, the backup system was also in the store and was also stolen. So unfortunately, the business was crippled because of the theft that happened. Now, here's the causes of data breaches. The ITRC, and again, that's Identity Theft Resource Center, also listed the top causes of data breaches 2018. Hacking, or you've heard it as computer intrusion, which includes phishing, ransomware, or even skimming incidents, continues to lead as a top cause of a data breach. This accounts for about 39% of the overall number of breaches. The second most common type of data breach incident involves unauthorized access. This is actually a catch-all identifier. An example is when someone gains access to a website or other system using someone else's account or other methods, or not updating software patches or malware protection, or even a criminal getting access to a password because you have weak passwords. For example, the word password probably isn't a very good password. And by the way, I was just curious to see how many people actually use the word password. And in 2018, that was it was among the top 3 most common passwords, amazingly enough. It moved to number 4 in 2019. We also, another incident that happened just last year, in fact, is we went skiing with the family, and my husband found a cell phone in the ski resort, and unfortunately, we were trying to figure out how we're going to contact this person to return his cell phone, and it was password protected. So my son, who is 13 years old, said, let me just try it and see if I can figure out what his password is. Amazingly enough, he was able to break his password, and his password was 111111. So it was probably the automatic password that came with the cell phone. And so when I looked it up as far as where it's rated as far as that kind of password is, it's the number 9 most used password. Is that people don't even change the password that cell phones or computers come with. So it's really important to make sure that you use passphrases when you're creating passwords, because it's very easy to access computers. So one thing about that is that we were able to text the last group of people that he texted and said, we have your cell phone, and we sent it to him because he was in San Francisco, and we sent him his cell phone, and he was nice enough to send us a $100 gift card for Amazon. But things like that do happen. And when my son opened the cell phone, he had financial information on there. He had 60,000 emails or something crazy like that. But it's just amazing how much information we can hold on a cell phone. Now, the third and fourth that's listed here as far as the top causes of breach are employee negligence and accidental exposures, which is about 12 to 9% respectively. Unfortunately, insider theft made the list at 3%. So this includes rogue employees who steal information, such as employees who promises to follow company's security procedures, but they may circumvent at any time. So disgruntled employee may delete company information or databases. Then, of course, that causes business interruption, or even steal company information, because the employees are figuring out now that how valuable private information is and how they can be sold for a lot of money in the black market. Now, data on the move also made the list at 2%. Data on the move is when an electronic storage device, laptop, or paper folders leave the office where it is normally stored, or when personal information or data are being moved electronically, then they're more vulnerable for identity theft. So here's the types of breaches that we've seen internally at NAS, in fact, our Tokio Marine HCC. In fact, we've been writing cyber for over 20 years, and we probably average about over 1,000 cyber claims that we're seeing on an annual basis, and that's increasing every year. So here's some of the most common types of breaches that we're constantly seeing. The first one is employee carelessness and negligence. So this could be intentional or unintentional. So an example would be an employee unintentionally sending confidential information to the wrong recipients. How many times have we done that, where we send an email to the wrong person because there's auto fill in regards to the, the person that you're sending it to? So this happens constantly. There's also employees in social media. Now, we've seen an uptick in claims involving social media where employees are sharing private information on social media, such as Facebook or Twitter, where they're taking selfies, and in the background is their laptop or computer that has private information, and easily you can zoom in and get the detailed information. There's also ransomware. This is our biggest concern right now, when we're seeing a huge increase in ransomware claims. What we're seeing is, as far as ransomware is, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with ransomware, and we'll go a lot more details in future slides, is just some 101 as far as what ransomware is this is a type of cyber attack where an employee of an organization either opens an email or it clicks on a bad website, which there's a virus, then it infects and encrypts that facility's computer system, so you can't access your own files or records until you pay a ransom. Now, the demands used to be small amounts, and it is in Bitcoins. So it used to be in small amounts because they wanted to make sure that they stayed under the FBI radar. However, we've seen higher demands of ransom, and some even 6 figures. So this has been a huge concern at our office. Once the company pays the ransom and get the key to unencrypt the data, they would take then a further action to protect the information so it doesn't happen again. And unfortunately, on several occasions, we find that once we unlock the files may be corrupt, or there may be missing data. So unfortunately, we're seeing these types of claims. Rogue employees, which I mentioned earlier, who may promise to follow company procedures, but may circumvent. So obviously they could steal the information or delete the information. There's also phishing schemes, which is increasing as far as cyber claims is concerned. This is where criminals pretend to be a trustworthy person or company in an attempt to get sensitive data from people. Especially nowadays in the beginning of the year when it's tax time. There are criminals who create emails that look like an email address belonging to maybe the owner of the company or the CFO of the company, but it's really coming from the criminal. And then they trick employees such as the HR department or their accounting department to email them private information, including W-2 forms. So the IRS is definitely warning companies to make sure that you're careful to make sure that the email requests that you're receiving are valid. There's also lost and stolen devices such as laptops, USB thumb drives, cell phones, like I mentioned before. With these types of lost devices, it happens a lot when people are traveling. In fact, same story last week in Nashville. I was checking in my bag, and all of a sudden there was a announcement that someone forgot their laptop at the security, and that happens constantly. There's also BA snafus. There's a myth that if business associates use a TPA or a cloud provider, then the company is safe from any types of cyber liabilities or claims. Unfortunately, you as a company could still be pulled into that claim as a result of a breach, because it is your clients that you collected their information. Therefore, you may have the responsibility to make sure that their private information is protected and safe. Now let's take a look at the cyber coverage. Some of you may have a $50,000 coverage. We've worked with the bar plan to provide a $50,000 embedded coverage that is attached to your LPL policy. But we have both a higher limits coverage that sits above the $50,000 offering, or a standalone cyber coverage even if you don't have the $50,000 embedded. And let's discuss the coverages that's provided under that policy. Now, with cyber liability coverage, you'll hear the references of first party as well as third party coverages. And as you can see, just the first party coverage alone, there's a lot of coverage components that's associated to the cyber insurance policy. Now, generally speaking, first party coverage is designed to protect you as insured in providing any expense coverages such as regulatory notification requirements or expenses to recover data or to replace lost income or other expenses as a result of a data breach or cyber attack. So I'm going to go into detail with these coverage components so you understand the broadness of cyber coverages that we offer nowadays. And just to give you some perspective, when we first started writing the coverage 20 years ago, we only had 4 coverage components. So you can see that the cyber insurance and coverage has definitely evolved since we started writing cyber. The first one that's listed here, and I just want to check the questions, see if there's any questions so far. And I see a comment, first of all, it says, "Go Chiefs." I have to say, way to go Chiefs, and I want to say congratulations. That was a great game, by the way, and but unfortunately, I did not win any of my squares, but it was nevertheless an excellent game. But coming from California, unfortunately, I was San Francisco. I was going for San Francisco, but it was definitely a great game. So congratulations. So going on to cyber insurance, breach event costs. Now, this is the most triggered and most expensive coverage component because there's a lot of coverage and expenses that's associated with just this one coverage component. This section would cover the legal expenses. As you know, attorneys are not cheap, and rightly so, because of the fact that, you know, especially with cyber breaches, it's definitely more complex now, and there's a lot of regulations that you need to research and you need to be knowledgeable about. So obviously attorneys are going to be expensive. There's IT forensics. It's also covered under this coverage component. IT forensics also are not cheap. So they're going to investigate what happened. There's also, under breach event costs, PR expenses. There's customer call centers and credit monitoring expenses. So you can see how this coverage component alone can be very expensive. We've expanded our cyber liability coverage offering to also include post-breach remediation costs, which covers post-breach remediation, exactly what the name says, to mitigate any potential of a future breach or privacy breach. There's also Brand Guard, which is a reputational harm coverage that provides coverage for lost income directly resulting from an adverse media report or notification to customers of a security breach. There's also system failure coverage. Now, this coverage provides expenses and costs to recover or replace data that's compromised or maybe damaged or even lost because the computer was, stolen or lost. And basically, it will cover for accidental damage or destruction of electronic media or computer hardware. But it also extends coverage for business income loss or in business interruption expenses that results from a total or partial interruption of your computer system. The next on the list is dependent system failure. This is similar to the system failure coverage above, but this is in relation to failure of service of a service provider computer system that's caused by a special cyber perils. Cyber extortion, this is for demand for money, including a key in exchange for a key to get access of your files back. An example I gave you earlier was the ransomware. Now, I just something I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention, is that Typically with ransomwares or cyber extortion claims, they use the currency of Bitcoins. And the reason why they use Bitcoins is because it's untraceable. So Bitcoins is actually the currency that's associated also in the black market for drug as well as sex trafficking. There's cybercrime, which is also an extensive coverage. This cybercrime, you may have heard of it and referred to as social engineering coverage. And that's the common name or reference in the cyber insurance arena. So this provides 3 sections, basically. One is the loss of money or securities incurred due to financial fraud, including wire transfer funds. And we have some claims examples in regards to cybercrime where there's a wire transfer fraud. It also includes charges incurred for unauthorized calls resulting from fraudulent use of insured telephone systems. There's also loss of money or securities due to phishing attacks, expenses incurred to notify customers of phishing attacks directed to against you, and the cost of reimbursing customers or client for their losses that result from those phishing attacks against you. There's also reward expense coverages, and this coverage component covers amounts paid to informants for information leading to the arrest and conviction of persons responsible for a first-party insured event. There's also court attendance costs. This covers for any reasonable costs incurred to attend court, arbitration, or mediation, or other legal proceedings or hearings as a witness in a claim covered under the policy. No, it's not going to the next page. Okay, so I've gone through the first party coverage. Now I'm going to go through the third party coverage, which is a third party liability from actual claims made against the facility or an entity by an outside third party, as mentioned, including various governmental or regulatory entity or customers as well. These potential risks include any third parties resulting from a data breach or other cyber events. So the first one on the list is multimedia liability coverage, and this provides defense coverage from claims of third parties alleging copyright or trademark infringements, libel or slander, plagiarism, or personal injury. Covers both online or offline media. So a claim involving a copyright infringement because of marketing materials or flyers, for instance, would be covered, which we've seen. We've seen people Google pictures and they use those pictures for marketing materials on their website or in marketing flyers. And next thing you know, they get a cease and desist email or letter saying you can't use this. We want some payment because of the fact that you're using our pictures. So that's going to be something that's going to be covered under this coverage section. Security and privacy liability. This provides third-party coverage resulting from a security or privacy breach, which includes failure to safeguard online and offline information, or to prevent virus attacks, denial of service attacks, or the transmission of malicious attacks. So a customer, again, could sue your entity for not securing their private information. So for instance, when you send out the notifications that there were stolen laptops and their identity maybe were included in that laptop, they can turn around and file a lawsuit against the company. Privacy regulatory defense and penalties. This provides coverage for third-party coverage for fines and penalties resulting from privacy regulatory proceedings brought by federal, state, or local government professional agencies such as OCR, HIPAA, and so forth. So law firms and other similar professional services providers must comply with certain professional rules of conduct, as well as these regulatory schemes designed to safeguard consumer privacy and information. And there's definitely a lot more movement to make sure that consumers' private information is protected. PCI DSS liability. This provides coverage for assessments or fines or penalties that's imposed by banks or credit card companies due to non-compliance with the payment card industry data security standard services. So for instance, American Express, MasterCard, JTB banks, instead of, there's the regulatory aspect of that there could be claims from the regulatory agencies, but the banks and credit card companies also created this PCI DSS basically where they can also assess any penalties and fines because a company or a merchant that's using their credit cards are not following their security procedures and protocols to make sure that the credit card customers' information are protected. TCPA Defense provides legal expense coverages to defend against any Telephone Consumer Protection Act. So it's a very simple coverage in regards to this TCPA. I want to make sure we're okay in time. Claims examples. Now, I like going through a lot of claims examples because it should really help explain how the cyber insurance policy can be triggered. So I've included a lot of claims examples throughout the presentation here, which should definitely be helpful for you. Now, the first claim here is where an attorney discovered his laptop was stolen from his office over the weekend, and unfortunately, it was not password protected nor encrypted. And I've given you an example where we found a cell phone that wasn't protected at all. So it included client lists and personal information. The client list and personal information were actually not included in the laptop. However, several confidential documents, including powers of attorney and estate plans, were stored in the laptop. So we hired an IT vendor who was able to complete a list of the individuals that were potentially affected by the breach and notified those individuals. So there's also a breach coach or legal counsel that had to be hired who provided legal advice regarding notification obligations and drafted notifications. And there's also credit monitoring services for the affected individuals. So before I move on, I have another poll question just to be curious. Poll question. So the question here, and it looks like you already started voting, is whether or not you've received any notification letters in the mail before. So I'll give you a few minutes to answer the question. And the results makes more sense now. And please, in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to type your questions in the questions section of the box. I hear there's a Kansas parade today, so I don't know if you're watching TV in the background, watching the parade, or if you're even at the parade. Okay, so it looks like we have about 85% of the votes in, so we'll give you a few more minutes to answer the questions. Just want to make sure everyone gets their CLE credits. Okay, so it looks like about 68% said that they've received notification letters in the mail, and about 32% no, which is more of a, which makes sense because like I showed you earlier, about 446 million records were stolen just in 1 year. So this makes sense that there would be notification letters that's been sent out. So unfortunately, we were robbed a year and a half ago, and they were able to steal about 4 laptops in our house. It's a family of 3. However, we have 4 laptops. Don't know why we need 4 laptops, and then 2 iPads were also stolen, among jewelry and name it. But unfortunately, we are part of the statistics now, and you know, my husband and I, we're not the only ones receiving notification letters, but my son also received a notification letter. So unfortunately, it does happen to minors as well. But going back on the cyber claim here, I just want to, in every single cyber claim example that I include on the presentation, I want to also add some risk management tips. Now, not having your laptops password protected and encrypted is like having an open door to your house, inviting criminals to come in and rob your house. So this is not just laptops, like I mentioned, it's also thumb drives. It's very easy to just encrypt and put some passwords into your devices. So make sure that you take that extra step. In fact, there's statistics that says, you know, with 7 characters of password, it only takes about 5 hours to break that password. And cyber criminals are having more sophisticated things that they can break passwords with. So that's definitely getting faster for them to break passwords. So what I always say is have at least 10 or 11 characters in your password. And obviously I continuously educate my family on this. So now my son has a 13-word password just for his cell phone, which is fine. But you know, this is something that's very important that I want to make sure that I share with you. Now here's another cyber claims example where a tax law firm's computer system was hit with a virus that caused its network to be shut down for 2 days. A hacker claimed responsibility for the attack, citing tax resistance. I don't know why my presentation is not showing. Okay, showing tax resistance, and basically, you know, basically the criminal's motive was because he was resistant of taxes, and definitely a motive that most of us could probably relate to. In addition to the network shutdown, though, the firm lost client data. So we hired an IT forensics specialist to eliminate the virus and restore the system. So unfortunately, during that time that we were restoring it, there was business interruption. So it took employees time to store client data because they had to re-enter the information and from backups, and that was also recovered, as well as income loss caused by the network shutdown. So a risk management tip here is make sure that you back up your system. And when you do back up your system, make sure that the backup is stored elsewhere and not same place where maybe your computer or your systems are stored. Right, it's not going to the again. Okay, don't know why it keeps flipping. Okay, so in the next cyber example, get there, is where an insured noticed their email has a rule set. Basically, an email with wire or bank or fund information was immediately forwarded to another email address. The insured was able to turn off the rule but didn't know if any information was exfiltrated or accessed. They put their insurance carrier on notice, and that was us. And we hired a breach coast and IT forensics to look into the matter. There were hundreds of accounts, credit card numbers, and social security numbers that were compromised. Insurance paid for the IT forensics, breach coach, notification letters, postage, and credit monitoring, which totaled about $35,000. So risk management here is that some cyber breaches are harder to detect, such as this example, because sometimes we've seen companies where they don't even see that it's happening. But what's an immediate risk management tip that I can tell you is to take is to prevent cyber breaches. It's also important to regularly check for vulnerabilities in your systems. So that's something that your IT team or that can handle that checkup. So in this next example is where a lawyer's office manager received an email from another lawyer who was traveling, and he basically had instructions to wire funds to a specified location. So the office manager wired the requested funds. Shortly after wiring the funds, the office manager calls the lawyer to confirm that he received the requested funds. To make sure that they received the requested fund, the lawyer advised that he did not ask for any funds to be wired. Upon investigating, they discovered that the office manager had been tricked by a hacker who created an email address nearly identical to the lawyer's email address. So the lawyer contacted the bank to make sure that funds are reimbursed. Unfortunately, the bank wasn't able to recall the funds because it was already withdrawn and they couldn't trace it. So in that case, the bank did not reimburse the lawyer for any lost funds, and the insurance company paid for that $39,000 resulting from the wire transfer funds. Now, we've seen these types of claims numerous times, and like I said, we've seen a higher request for monies as well. But a risk management tip on this is, some cyber criminals may access, the executive systems, the executive's email, and they copy their signature or whatever it might be, or even their email address. So they can see, a lot of times, they can see their computers, they can see the calendar and when they're going to be traveling next. So that's typically when they send out the request to, wire transfer some monies. So my risk management tip here is, make sure that you pick up the phone to verify that the wire transfers are actually valid. Now, if they're traveling and you can't call them, you can email them, because obviously if they're sending an email to you saying transfer these monies, they should be able to access their emails. So don't reply from that email, because that response might go straight to the criminal. Open up another email to send it to the executive or the other owner or another lawyer, and make sure that that request for the wire transfer is actually valid. Now, I want to go to the last poll question that we have today. Just because we do see a lot of ransom claims, I wanted to add a ransom question here. Question is, what does ransomware do? 1, encrypt the user's file. 2, locks users out of the device. 3, demand payments. And 4, all of the above.
Melvin, also you happen to have a chat question.
Okay, it looks like about 79% of you voted so far, so we'll wait for a couple of minutes. Okay, it looks like 95% got the right answer. It's all of the above, and it looks like most of you are, probably all of you, I would say, is paying attention or familiar with ransomware. And let me show you an example of a ransomware email. So here's a note that would pop up if your computer or your laptop or whatever is infected with a ransomware virus. So the note would include a very detailed information with Q&As typically. It talks about, what happened to your files or your computer. There's even a section that asks, is this in your language? And so they provide a Google link to translate the message for you if you need it. And it talks about how did this happen. So there's an explanation of how the ransomware came about. There's also Q&As on how you can recover the files. You can choose to wait for a miracle and get the ransomware amount doubled, or pay in Bitcoins because there's no other way to get your files. There's also Q&As in regards to how to purchase the Bitcoin, and some ransomware notes even includes a link to educate yourself about Bitcoins. Some famous ransomwares include, which we've probably heard before, are Locky, Ryuk, Petya, and WannaCry, which is considered, WannaCry is actually considered one of the most popular and biggest ransom attack in history because it affected so many computers, even if they were just asking for a small amount, $300 ransom. And they're known to be user-friendly. Most ransomware viruses are, because the criminals want to make sure that it's easy as easy as possible to get their monies. That they even came up with a joke in regards to WannaCry, where they said, there was a hashtag that said, #WannaCry, because ransomware criminals provide better customer support than most companies. So, these types of claims definitely happen. So here's an example of a ransomware claim where an attorney's firm found a compromised workstation where a hacker appeared to have captured a copy of the client's files, including health records and social security numbers. The hacker didn't encrypt the files, but claimed to have access to the firm's entire client record database and threatened to release it publicly if the firm did not pay $300,000 in ransom. Like I mentioned, we are seeing large amounts of ransom. The law firm reported the incident under the cyber liability insurance. Since the compromised computer station contained personal identifiable information, an IT forensic investigator and breach coach were retained. This claim has a potential cost of more than $408,000. Now, ransom claims have definitely become more sophisticated, to the point that sometimes they go in and encrypt your files, and they can even look at your files and figure out what's your worth. And sometimes they figure out what's the right amount for the ransom because they can have access to your files. We've also seen ransomware claims where we've seen it to say, okay, I want you to prove that you have access to the files. And sometimes they send you just part of the files or maybe a section of the files to say, here's a proof that we have access to your files. And a funny story that I want to share with you, a recent claim that we had, is where we actually asked for proof that they had access to the files, and they gave us a portion of files that they accessed with it, so they gave us an encryption key or a password key to access that file. And then our IT vendor thought, let's give it a try and see if maybe the other files have the same password. And luckily, that same password worked for all the files. So obviously we had access to the files, we didn't pay any more ransom, and we were able to access that and basically fix the computer systems from there. We've also seen ransomware so sophisticated now where they have access again to some of the files, and they are now posting to websites saying, if these companies don't pay for the ransom, they're actually advertising it to say, so-and-so company chose not to pay for the ransom. So here's some of the information that were affected, and they didn't care that this is going to go public. So we're definitely seeing all kinds of ransomware attacks out in the public. Oops, go back. Now, hackers will go after large companies, obviously. They wouldn't, a myth is, we're a small company, so we're not going to get hit. Unfortunately, ransomware and other viruses does not require an organization to be specifically targeted. In fact, certain viruses target vulnerable systems. So it doesn't even matter how big or small you are. It really depends on how vulnerable you are. Another myth is that, we have an IT department who makes sure that the most current virus protection is in place, and, firewalls and other system controls are in place. And I have the IT guy that can handle all of that. What happens though is you cannot discount the human element where employees or third-party vendors will disclose information and error sending, and commit errors in sending, information to wrong recipients. So that's definitely an area that needs to be, make sure that you're, that you're vulnerable in. Another common myth is that our records are stored with a third-party vendor, which I've already discussed, that's definitely also a vulnerability with all companies. Now, here's a chart of the direct cost of a cyber breach, and I won't go into details because I'll go into more details in the next slides, but just to give you an example of how much claims cost nowadays. So like I said, legal expenses are very expensive. IT forensics are also very expensive because computer systems and even the criminals are becoming a lot more sophisticated. And then there's, of course, there's customer notification costs, call center calls, there's PR costs that's associated to cyber breaches. Now, I want to go into more detail here. This shows a flow chart. It's basically a simplified graph that shows how the workflow is that's associated when there is a breach. There's definitely the short-term costs and ramification when there's a breach. So the first column in purple is obviously the discovery of the breach. The blue section here, it represents the evaluation of the breach. So on the first step, of course, would be to consult with an experienced attorney. So we would hire an attorney or a breach coach, and they will be responsible for researching all the applicable laws to ensure that the insured is in compliance with the various states and federal regulations. They will interface with the various vendors as well who will handle the breach. They will be available to hold the insured's hand and answer any questions that they have. Now, attorney's role is very important. We've had a cyber breach where it affected a company that had 14 locations. And so they researched what were the notification requirements were for these 14 locations that were in different states, 14 states to be exact. And they researched that some of the notification requirements for some states were identical to other states. So they were able to shrink it to 5 different notification letters. So that definitely helped with the cost as far as notifications. So, you know, that's something that obviously attorneys do. Now, we would also hire an IT forensic because they would be needed to basically figure out or investigate what the cause of the breach was, what data was accessed, and how to best prevent another breach from occurring. And so they play a very important role in a cyber breach. Now, the green area is managing the short-term crisis. So this includes the customer notifications. So we need to notify all the people that's affected by the cyber breach, which is required by the vast majority of the states. This alerts the affected customers that they need to be credit monitoring so they can monitor their credit and they can catch any fraud quickly. There's also data recovery and business interruption costs, which we've discussed, where if you can't access your files, there's definitely going to be business interruption costs. And PR firm may also be needed to help the company get their message out and will also help minimize the breach's impact on the company's reputation. Now, however, breach expenses and consequences can live well beyond the incident, and corrective actions taken is very important. So we always hope that we can control and mitigate the claim so it doesn't get past to the red phase. So if the entity doesn't manage the breach effectively, there's obviously a high risk of third-party lawsuits. There's also possibility of regulatory fines and penalties for non-compliance of privacy laws. In addition to the actual cost, there's indirect costs such as reputational harm or damage or income loss. So that means that a potential new client may decide to get services at a different law firm because, you know, the current clients may not feel comfortable or safe because of the fact that that company already had a cyber breach. So that's something that's very important. Now, I do want to take some time to discuss some risk management tips for you. Now, as part of your program, the bar plan has extended your members' benefits offering by giving you access to cyber risk website. As a bar plan insured, you would log on to the bar plan website as you normally would, and there will be a link there to access the risk management website. You can access the website via your members' portal, and access is limited to the par plan insureds only, and therefore it's not accessible for public use. The website provides risk management tools and resources that help mitigate a breach. There's compliance materials that are state specific, because again, like I said, regulations are not just, there's federal regulations as well as state regulations. And there's quick tips and up-to-date rules and regulations by state. There's sample policies, which includes vendor agreements, business associates agreements, and they come in Word format, so that way you can it's basically a template that you can download and tailor for your own use. There's an incident response plan section, which is very important. There's also best practices, and I want to go through some of these examples of the best practices. So part of your risk management site includes training materials. In fact, we use it in-house, where we use it for employees training, where some of the trainings are 10 to 20 minutes long. And one of the trainings that I put down here because it's a huge issue right now, is the ransomware. So it gives you information about what ransomware is, examples of what ransomware looks like, and then it also gives you best practices, which I've captured on this slide. And then at the end, there's quizzes. So one of the quizzes, for instance, is the one that you just took, which is the poll question. So there's best practices to follow in regards to how to handle or detect, ransomwares. So examples as far as, ransomware best practices is, don't open suspicious emails. Typically, you can tell if there's a suspicious emails. For instance, I get almost weekly reports of my American Express balance. So I can sometimes tell if it's a phishing email or, it's an invalid email, because you can just tell by looking at some certain emails. And so what happens is, I also see a lot of Amazon suspicious emails. So I'm sure you've seen some of those emails as well. Another tip is don't open email attachments from emails that look suspicious, and don't click on the links within those emails that you're unsure about. So here's some tips of what to do. Do hover over the link in the emails to see the true web page. Because if you put your mouse or browser on the link, it will show the address of the URL. And if it looks encrypted, that's something that's definitely suspicious. Do check for digital signatures in the subject as another level of authentication. And do use common sense and report any emails when you're in doubt. So again, these types of trainings are available to you through the risk management website. Here's another risk management tip in regards to phishing emails. So an example is where criminals use emails or text messages to trick you into giving them your personal information. They may try to steal passwords or account numbers or social security numbers. And if they get that information, they could gain access to your email or your bank's or other accounts. So scammers launch thousands of phishing attacks every day, and they're often successful. And basically, you just want to make sure that you're following these tips, such as, look to see if your name is missing as an addressee in the email. Be suspicious of any email that requests user names or passwords, because typically they don't ask those things. So maybe they're phishing for private information. We've seen emails that use bad grammar and poor spelling, because a lot of these phishing emails come from other countries. And that's what makes it also difficult, is because of the fact that when we see that the criminals are from other countries, it's really hard to, reprimand them. Short emails that threaten or otherwise create urgency is something that to be suspicious about. Act now before your account will be shut down or something like that. You think, oh, I paid my bill, and why is there an urgency? Hover over your mouse over any website and links that should see the actual addresses. Use common sense, obviously. And phishing emails are getting harder to spot, but when in doubt, ask your IT department. I see emails all the time, and I send it to our IT department saying, just want to check to see if this is valid. And in fact, we do internal test runs who's clicking on certain emails that look suspicious, and we've seen employees that just don't even pay attention. So that's something that you can also do. So social engineering tips. I mentioned that social engineering is, as far as cyber policy is concerned, is labeled as cybercrime. So here's some tips for you, where the easiest way for hackers to get your information is when you give them, when you give it to them. Hackers do this through social engineering. Social engineering is a fancy word for a simple concept, which is trickery or distraction practices. Social engineering comes in many forms, such as emails. We've seen phone calls. And this happens quite a bit where they target retired people. Social media and text messages also, and it's so prevalent now with the text messages now. The best defense to social engineering is to stay aware, learn how to spot and use common sense, and the most common clues of communication involving social engineering scams. So when you look at cybercrime, here's some questions to ask yourself. Is there, again, sense of urgency? Is it too good to be true? Sometimes if they say, here's a free $100 if you click on this link, I'd be wary about that. Does the communication request information they should not have access to, such as account numbers or password information? And so that's something to watch out for in regards to social engineering crimes. We also included some technical safeguards here so you can use for yourself or your IT department. Make sure that you have a two-factor authentication. Backup is very important. Software updates, a lot of us, if you have iPhones, you get those warnings from your iPhones that you have a software update. Definitely update those. And the reason why there are updates is because they're updating any vulnerabilities so that it's a fix to those vulnerabilities. There's also mobile device management. Always password protect and encrypt mobile devices when possible. And I love this chart because it really does give some immediate mitigation steps for various cyber events. So I won't go into details. It's available to you. Like I said, you can access the PowerPoint presentation and the handouts. So for example, it has information on ransomware, isolate infected computer, phishing emails attacks, malware infection, email compromises, unauthorized files and user accounts, mistaken wire transfers. Now, here's some final takeaways, and let me check if there's any questions. There's a question in regards to credits, and I believe I have information here from Joseph. The credit, it does qualify for credits in Kansas and Missouri, as well as 1.0 credit in Tennessee. So you would need to email the request to info@thebarplan.com to apply for the CLE credit. So some final takeaways here. PHA is definitely banned in the black market because it's a form of income for criminals. So it used to be that they steal data. However, ransomware attacks are on the rise, which has proven to be a very profitable way for criminals to make money. In fact, Cybersecurity Ventures reports that ransomware cost businesses $5 billion worldwide in 2017 and upwards to $8 billion in 2018, because it's another way for cyber criminals to collect monies, an easy way for them to collect money. So risk management is crucial in mitigating risks, the cyber risks, and employee training is definitely crucial to help prevent some of the claims that we're seeing. So that ends the presentation. If there's any questions. The question is, when you say the insurance pays for an attorney or forensic IT, does that, the rest of the question, let's go to the question. In the insured, I'm not sure what the rest of the question is. I can't scroll to the question. But basically, when there's a cyber breach, we will kick in and hire an IT forensic and attorney to help you mitigate that claim and handle any regulatory requirements to notify any customers that were affected. We would hire a forensic IT person to research what data was compromised and so forth. So that's when a cyber policy will be triggered and handle the cyber breach. Sorry. Oops. Siri is listening. Okay, and I think that should be done. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email the bar plan at info@thebarplan.com. And I want to say thank you again for your time today. And I hope this was informational and helpful to all of you. Have a great day.
Can you hear me, Melvin?
Yes, I can.
Okay. There were still a couple questions. I don't know if you wanted to still answer them.
I can't see the questions. Let me see.
I'll read them to you.
Sure.
One says, how would one encrypt one's cell phone?
Okay. What was the question, Joseph?
How would one encrypt their cell phone?
I would definitely ask your IT department to do so. And I mean, I didn't do it myself. So they would be able to assist as far as encrypting it. Also, your like Verizon or AT&T plans can also help with the encryption of your cell phones. That's the same with US thumb drives, because I know when I travel, I use thumb drives quite a bit when I have a presentation to use. It's a very easy thing to do where the IT department sets it up on my computer where I put in a thumb drive. It says you can't access the thumb drive until it's encrypted. It's a software that they've already implanted in the computer, so you can easily just click to encrypt it. And when you're traveling, you know, when they plug in the thumb drive or even the cell phone, they won't be able to access it without being able to, you know, to log in or punch in the password. But as far as cell phones are concerned, encrypting it is also using, you know, a passphrase password. So there's some cell phones that don't even have passwords. So that's one way to definitely encrypt your cell phone, is to make sure that you have a passphrase or, you know, you have some kind of password in order for you to access that cell phone. Are there any questions?
Ramona seems to have left, but she had a question. And then there's one more about speak to the effectiveness of antivirus software.
What was the name of the antivirus software?
I think they were just speaking the general effectiveness of antivirus software.
It's definitely effective. You know, obviously, antivirus softwares are very effective, but it's very important to make sure that it's being updated periodically, because again, those vulnerabilities can be accessed, or, you know, criminals can have sophisticated ways to break those softwares or those encryptions. So it's a matter of making sure that you install it and then also update it on a regular basis.
And the one question previously was saying, when the insurance pays for an attorney, does that mean the insured gets an attorney and then you pay for it? Or does the insurance pay for a low hourly rate first-year lawyer, and then the insured has to pay the difference to get an experienced attorney?
We will pay for the attorney. So typically with the bar plan coverage, If they have the embedded $50,000 coverage, the retention is zero. So it's a first dollar coverage. So they typically, if they have the $50,000 coverage and then purchase the higher limits also would have a zero deductible for most of the coverage components, except maybe the cyber crime. So if we do hire an IT forensics, that's the insurance company, TMHCC, that's paying for those fees. I see Go Chiefs again. Rub it in.
I think that is all of them. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.